Hello, Brian from Las Vegas here, and it's time to review the explosive Baz Luhrmann biography about Elvis called Elvis. Baz Luhrmann makes one film every 9 years, people are somehow surprised a person could bedazzle a screenplay, and then he hibernates for the cycle to begin anew after recharging his energy. If mainstream maximalism had a name such that it defies filmmaking convention and common sense, it's Baz Luhrmann. The recent trendiness of musician biopics is a cancer to wannabe prestige cinema. It's home to such formulaic devices with the devilishly clever excuse of, well, that's what really happened. That, of course, being a great justification for inclusion of a plot device, but not the presentation of one. Most people aren't clever enough to take the typical rise and fall blueprint most musicians have lived over their careers and adapt it into something interesting. Rocket Man, a movie in this genre I actually liked, still has many of the problems that turned me away from the genre, but it was a fluffy, spirited jukebox musical before any cliches were given weight, and it's awesome. But that can't be my only criteria, because Elvis atomizes the notion of calling it bland, and I'm still not in love with it. What it's done successfully is give me a greater understanding of a musician's appeal. I feel like I get Elvis leaving the theater more than I did walking in, something a biopic hasn't done in forever, and if that's all it wanted, mission accomplished. The end credits blurb that exists to remind you this is all based on a true story says, Elvis is the highest-selling solo recording artist of all time. He's the final boss of American musical popularity. I'm supposed to feel in my bones, as the 25-year-old man born long after Elvis passed away that I am, that he's not just a big thing, but the biggest thing. Luhrmann is a perfect match to remind you Elvis's showmanship put people in hysterics. Women leapt from their chairs screaming, they'd cling to his limousine as it drove by, they threw underwear at him in a sign of pure sexually repressed devotion. The phrase Elvis has left the building is about how women wouldn't leave the venue on the chance they could catch more glimpses of him backstage. They had to be told Elvis was no longer there for them to go home. His allure is beyond parody, and yet Luhrmann is the ideal maestro of excess to make it palatable, to make you feel it, to make you understand it. The editing and cinematography screaming in your face, the thrill of his performances is a bullseye. Perfect visual storytelling. The problems begin with, yes, the cliche rise and fall storyline we're so familiar with is the story of Elvis Presley, and the longer the film goes on, the greater presence that takes up in the film. Only the film's presentation never changes. Elvis is a little long if it's not trying to say anything profound about the guy himself. It hits the beats you would expect for a movie that thinks it's saying something profound, whether it's his childhood obsession with comic books paralleling the American dream, the assassinations of Kennedy and MLK stoking his political side, or the racially charged origins of his music. Elvis simultaneously hits its aforementioned mission statement but throws caution to the wind developing anything else. Luhrmann is his own worst enemy, treating the performances and drama of Elvis's life in this script as dramatic equals when they absolutely are not. In musician biopic tradition, the subject is surrounded by figures who may have been real but are about as compelling as bags of sand. Elvis in particular overlooks Priscilla Presley being 14 when the two of them met and fall in love because that detail's the least bit unsavory, so a total commitment to reality and honesty isn't the reason we're here. Luhrmann's characterization of Presley's parents and friends certainly tell you about their general role in his story without elaborating on much they actually did to support that. It's the greatest showman school of storytelling. With all this camera sweeping, hyper-composited montages, and a number of cuts per scene that had put Olivier Megaton to shame, the style doesn't match the content, like Megan Thee Stallion reading a statistics textbook. All credit to Luhrmann that we're seeing a final product clearly of his own design. Movies of such stylistic ilk often result in disorienting, incoherent slogs where we can't even see what's on screen properly. The editing might be quick, but I can still register the sensory and emotional pivots Luhrmann wanted to get across and see the subject of the frame. It's just that all the space in between those pivots you'll find in a typical movie isn't there, requiring you be in a constant state of awareness to keep up and artistically decode them. But this combination of forces creates a film which wears thin. You have two elements which promise to hold the film together: the flamboyance of Luhrmann's filmmaking and a nonverbal message the film wants to convey through it. They exist in perfect harmony until you introduce a third element that every movie has to account for by default: runtime. Elvis is way too fucking long. And the longer Luhrmann's ostentation is mismatched with the hard biographical portions of the film he doesn't care about, the more sensory wear will come as a result. Eventually, you hit a wall, the style stops registering, and there's nothing to invest me in the film. I couldn't take it anymore, which included caring as much about the positive harmony the film was built upon. And now there's nothing to slow down this runaway train of just wishing the movie would end already. I feel like the guy explaining the reactor meltdown in Chernobyl. Or that's how the film would go if it weren't for Austin Butler. No matter how bloated Elvis becomes as a movie, Butler's performance never stops being mesmerizing. Elvis is a guy so famous, an entire line of work is made up of bad impersonations of him. And yet here Butler is, finding a genuinely Oscar-worthy portrayal of a man so often reduced to a cartoon version of himself. When the film eventually shows real footage of Elvis just before his death, I had to remind myself the real man didn't actually look like the person I was seeing. That's how effective he was. Even towards the end, when the film was starting to wear out its welcome, it's a stroke of genius to have Butler sweating profusely and physically destroying himself during a 10-minute performance sequence, and then immediately follow that up with the realization that fat-ass Tom Hanks made him do that basically every day until he died of drug-induced exhaustion. Hanks is sadly as bad in this as Butler is good, and for some f***ed up and evil reason I can't ascertain, Luhrmann made him the narrator. I feel like everything I have to say about Elvis gives the impression I think it's terrible, but the longer I go on and on about how it doesn't work, the more I feel like I'm trying to convince myself of something, which is not a good sign. Luhrmann believes the real Elvis Presley's appeal came from the tension of people wondering whether or not you ethically should like him based on the conventions of artistic decency and what you've been told they are. There's a passion and vision behind the film which I absolutely admire, even if I can critically outline how exactly it doesn't work, and I shouldn't. Maybe he's just playing fourth-dimensional chess, willfully instilling the same dilemma within the viewer. A far-fetched idea, but does it not say something in itself that I'm considering Luhrmann would have done this in good faith to make the film better? Depending on your school of thought, the mystery within the frame of Elvis is more important than anything else it has to offer. Elvis is big and absurd, and it gave me a headache. A critical Zen riddle where scenes would leave me both loving and hating the film simultaneously for the same reasons. Only Baz Luhrmann could have made a movie this deliberately idiosyncratic with a Disney Channel kid giving a headlining performance on the caliber of Daniel Day-Lewis's Abraham Lincoln, while American icon Tom Hanks is on the level of Jared Leto in House of Gucci. You cannot tell me that's not some gesture of artistic defiance. This is the Michael Bay's Ambulance of musical biopics, and that's all you need to know. I'm giving Elvis a 5 out of 10. So hey, did you like this movie more than me? Less than me? Can you even tell? Well, if you care to, please tell me. And as always, if you like not only words, but the way I arrange and then say them, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to me, Brian from the channel Brian. Thank you. Thank you very much.